Hey, MCARBO brother, I'm Chris Nelson, President of MCARBO. Really excited to introduce the CZ P07 Trigger Spring Kit by MCARBO. This is a full comprehensive video on how to get a nice, smooth, clean trigger pull reduction for your CZ P07. These CZ P07s right out of the box have a fairly heavy and gritty trigger pull. That double action can be much to be desired. Same with the single action. So we started at 10 3/4. We brought that double action down to 6 3/4. And then that single action we started at 4 1/4. Brought it down to 2 1/4. So about a 50% trigger pull reduction across the board. Really love the way this trigger feels now. Single action is like a dream, man, and it is smooth as can be, smooth like butter. Double action, as what you'd expect, it's double action, but it's much more agreeable with what you'd expect for performance. When you're out there in the range, good, smooth trigger pull is a must. A heavy, gritty, nasty trigger pull, it's just not really realistic to think you're going to do very well. Now in this video, I know we cover a lot, polishing, sanding, the whole thing. If this isn't something that you really want to do yourself, we've got custom shop services. So you can send it to us. We're a Type 7 manufacturer, so there's no FFL fee, period. You just mail it directly to us. We take care of it. We mail it back to you. That's the nice thing about being a manufacturer. You can mail it right to the manufacturer and you're good to go. So excited about it. Check out our website for the custom shop services. Is that something you're interested in? Really eager to see the results you guys get from this kit. Let's get it on over tabletop, show you how we did this. Parts needed for this build, the CZ P07 Trigger Spring Kit by MCARBO. It includes everything you need for a nice, smooth, custom trigger job on your CZ P07. It's got a lighter hammer spring, lighter sear spring, that tiny one there, lighter firing pin block spring, lighter firing pin spring, lighter trigger return spring, and a heavy-duty firing pin retaining pin. Much better than what's in there. The one that's in there, you can only take it out maybe once, if that. Don't even recommend putting the factory one back in because it'll get so damaged in the process, and you'll see when we get into it. And a little section of 1000 grit sandpaper, excellent for knocking off some of those burrs and those rough machined edges on some of the parts. You'll see when we get into it here. Really great installation, really great kit for a nice, comprehensive, smooth, clean trigger pull. Tools needed for this build: 1/8 inch punch, 3/32 inch punch, 1/16 inch punch, a hammer, bench block, synthetic grease with PTFE, or really any kind of grease will work, but highly recommend the PTFE, micro-tip flathead screwdriver, needle nose pliers, and as always guys, make sure you're wearing iPro. Now if you want to take it to the next level, we've got polishing kits with 1/2 ounce can of Flitz polish, 3 bullet-shaped felt tip polishing bits, excellent for the rotary tool, a Dremel, or even the $8 Harbor Freight option's fine. And a microfiber towel, this is great if you want to hand polish, so this will do it as well. So just a little more time consuming. And the 2 nitrile 6mm gloves, great for keeping some of that heat off your hands, and obviously it's going to get a little messy, so excellent way to take it to the next level. But if you just want the straight up kit, you're going to use this 1000 grit sandpaper and the synthetic grease, or any grease for that matter, just like a wet sand on some of those parts that have rough edges, machining marks, or it's just burrs in general. So we're going to clean it up really nicely. Excited about this one. As usual, we'll go ahead and take this minute together and check our firearms, make sure they're clear. Check the chamber, check the bolt face, check the magazine well. This firearm's clear. Let's see what kind of factory double action trigger pull we're starting with. 10 pounds, 14.9 ounces. Let's take one more factory double action trigger pull to confirm. 10 pounds, 15.1 ounces. Let's see what kind of factory single action trigger pull we're starting with. 4 pounds, 3.8 ounces. Let's take one more factory single action trigger pull to confirm. 4 pounds, 3.5 ounces. All right, so we start the installation on the CZ P07 by pulling back on the slide. What we want to do is line up that notch on the slide with the notch on the frame. And then we'll take a little micro tip. I find it to be a lot easier, and just pop out that slide stop right there. All right, there's the slide stop. We can set that aside. And then we can pull on the slide all the way forward, and they're separated. So we got the pistol grip frame here, the slide. Set the pistol grip frame aside for a minute. We're going to focus on disassembling the slide all the way and then switching out the springs. Compress the recoil spring and guide rod. Comes right out just like that. We'll pull up and out on the barrel. It's out just like that. We need to remove a few more items though. We're going to replace the firing pin spring inside. Your firing pin's right back here, and the firing pin block spring right here. This is your firing pin block right here. So to get access to these, we need to tap out this pin back here. This is the pin I was talking about that breaks. So you need your bench block and your hammer. This pin, you can see, I put the factory pin back in, it's just mangled to pieces. It doesn't really have a lot of tensile strength. So what we're going to do is replace it with a heavy-duty firing pin retaining pin, and it has got a tremendous amount of shear strength, 1,800 pounds. So grab your 3/32 inch punch. We're going to just put it in that hole there and tap out that pin. There's the pin. Now the firing pin will come flying out, so grab another punch and just place it over top of that firing pin there as you remove your 3/32. All right, and slowly release it. There's the firing pin. So to remove the firing pin back here, what we want to do is press down on the firing pin block stop. We're going to do this simultaneously, so we're going to basically take our punch and compress the firing pin back here, just really just holding on to it. And what we'll do is we'll press down on the firing pin block stop. All right, and it's going to release. We're just kind of controlling the release here, and it's going to re-engage here in a second. All right. Now this time, make sure you keep good pressure on that firing pin block stop. It'll go flying on your table if you don't. And hold on to that firing pin if you can there. Keep it all together. Slowly releasing everything. There we go. See, it kind of sprung up at the end there. All right, so firing pin right there. Set that down. Our firing pin block stop and spring right there. And you can see the orientation the way it went in. So it went in just like this. Right? That opening channel facing the inside of the slide. And with this firing pin on the CZ P07, these two notches here, they're facing up towards the top of the slide because they need to locate with that pin right here. And then that pin's going to go through this notch up here. So it's all going to work together, and we'll go over it one more time as we put it back together. But basically, everything is removed at this point. We've got two springs that we'll be replacing. The other spring inside is a firing pin spring. You might have to grab it with your punch if you need to. And there it is. All right, so there it is. Slide is completely stripped at this point for what we need to do with it. You got the firing pin spring, your firing pin block, and your firing pin block spring, and then your firing pin retaining pin, the factory one. So we're replacing these three items right here, the pin and the two springs. What we're also going to do is do a little polishing on this firing pin block. You'll notice on the top of this firing pin block stop, there's a ton of rough edges and machining lines, and if you run your fingernail over it, you'll be able to feel it. It's just really rough, and that's what contributes to that gritty trigger pull. So what we want to do is smooth this out, and that's why we have that 1000 grit sandpaper in the kit. So that grittiness comes from metal on metal grinding and dragging together. It's just not smooth. So that's what we're going to do, is smooth it out so it's a nice, clean, smooth trigger pull each time you pull that trigger. Really goes a long way and is well worth it. So let's go ahead and grab our CZ P07 trigger spring kit by MCARBO. This one you're going to need that synthetic grease, or any sort of grease really will work for that matter. So we're going to open up this kit, take a look at what we can get inside, and get to work. I'm going to keep the bag just to keep the other springs in. And that's what I'll do. I'm going to immediately start swapping springs. So here's the 1000 grit sandpaper. We're going to use that here in just a second. Here's our custom lighter hammer spring, custom lighter trigger return spring, custom lighter firing pin spring, custom lighter sear spring, custom lighter firing pin block spring, and heavy duty firing pin retaining pin, 1800 pound shear strength. So really excited about all this hardware in this kit. We're going to just need for now the firing pin spring and the lighter firing pin block spring. So these two items right here. Put the rest of these items in one place on your table. We won't need these factory springs. I'm going to just throw the factory springs back in the bag so I don't get them mixed up. And we're going to keep them. You never know. It's always handy to have them. And I'm just going to throw these on just so I don't forget where they go. So the bigger one there is the firing pin spring. You know, this little narrow one with a ton of coils, this is the firing pin block spring right there. All right, cool. We're going to do a little sanding on that firing pin block stop. So just set that spring down for just a second. You know, have your little piece of 1000 grit flat on the table. And then what we'll do is we'll put some synthetic grease there and just coat it really well. And this initial application, put some grease on the 1000 grit as well. It's just going to help. It's kind of like a wet sand. You know, the idea is to not create any more friction than we need to. We just want to almost polish it. I mean, 1000 grit is really fine. So we're just going to be polishing the top of it here. Circular pattern. And try to make it even. You don't really want to be, you know, wobbling all over the place. Just flat on it. Circular pattern. You can go back and forth if you want. You know, I'm putting some medium pressure on it. You know, I'm not trying to change the geometry here. I'm just trying to knock off some of those burrs and that rough surface area. You know, we're going to take a few minutes and just really get some good smooth surface on here because it is gritty. I can already feel it smoothing out of the sandpaper. And when you start, it's going to be real gritty. You're going to feel a lot of the friction, but after a while, it's just going to be pretty smooth. And that's how you'll know that you're nearly there. Wipe it off, check our progress. Man, that looks awesome. Now these edges are a little rough too, so I'm just gonna grab the 1000 grit and just sort of rotate it around on that 1000 grit. I'm just rotating those edges there, and you can hear that scratchiness. There's some little sharpness on those edges. This is gonna make a huge difference. Now this is optional. If you don't feel comfortable doing this, then just don't do it, but I'm telling you, if you want to get that really smooth trigger pull, this is where it's at, man. I mean, the polishing's huge too. You could even polish this if you like. For the sake of keeping it fairly short video, I'm probably not gonna polish it. I think the sanding's doing a heck of a job here. And that's really the most important thing, is getting rid of all that hard, rough machined surface edges, because they mass produce these. So these aren't gonna be pristine edges. They're not taking each little part on a deburring wheel and polishing up perfectly. I mean, this is mass production. So those man hours would really add to the cost of the firearm. So it's nice to be able to do this stuff yourself. Those edges feel really good now. Just kind of knocking off any burr that might potentially be there. I'm just rotating it along the paper. Now the reason I'm not doing it on the table is that I don't want to accidentally take off too much, but it's 1000 grit, it's super fine. But I guess if you had it on the table and you kept going back and forth in the corner, yeah, you're gonna change the geometry. So I'm just holding it against my finger there. You know, it's not gonna be as hard a surface as the table, so it's not really gonna take off as much material. We're just doing real light finishing work here that definitely wasn't done in a manufacturing environment. So once you're happy with it, you know, I'm gonna do the top one more time. Add a little more grease there, especially if it starts drying out on you. We're just doing a wet sand here. You know, we don't want high friction. We just want to smooth everything out, almost polishing it. If you have the polishing kit, you could just do a quick little bit of sanding and jump right into polishing and bling this thing right up. But this is definitely the manual method here. All right, I'd say we're good to go now. Oh yeah, that's awesome. All right, so now that we got our firing pin block stop really finished nicely, super smooth, buttery smooth now. It's almost polished to a real fine, smooth surface, which is awesome. So don't go too much. We're just doing enough just to knock off any burrs. You know, you don't want to get deep down in the material and lose some of that hardness from the coating. It's not going to rust because we're putting grease on it. We're going to keep it clean. You know, it's nothing to worry about. I mean, we're down in Florida and we don't have any issues with it rusting. So it's something that's going to be a huge major performance improvement over what was there, which was just mass production machining, a lot of grittiness, not a really nice trigger pull, which makes it hard to enjoy to shoot. And then put a little grease on the end of that spring there, the firing pin block stop spring, and insert it into the firing pin block stop, and it's going to hold really well. That's always a nice little trick. And then we're going to drop it right into the slide, that little feature, that cutout feature facing the inside of the slide there. That's where the firing pin is going to go through, and this is what will lock and locate inside the firing pin right here, so you can see down that hole. So we'll have to push it all the way down to get it to clear the firing pin. So we'll take our punch and do that. So now we'll go ahead and insert the firing pin, lighter firing pin spring. All right, you can see this is where the pin is right here at the top. So what we want to do is have those cutouts facing the top of the slide. So we're going to have to push all the way down in that firing pin block stop. All right, just make sure that little cutout feature is facing the inside so that firing pin can get past it. So we're going to back out that firing pin a hair. All right, pushing down that firing pin block stop all the way. And then remember, smooth end is where we're looking right now. These notches are facing the top of the slide. That way there, they can all locate where they need to. And this should lock in place when you get it in correctly. See that? So we pushed in the firing pin, and then it engaged the firing pin block stop, and it's holding it right now. So make sure it locks and locates in place. Now we're going to put our heavy duty firing pin retaining pin in there to hold it all together. All right, so we're set up on the bench block. We're going to insert our heavy duty firing pin retaining pin. Now what we need to do is make sure this little slit right here is facing the top of the slide. So it's going to go in just like that. All right, I'm going to put a little grease on the lead end there just so it helps, You know, less wear the better, but this is going to compress when it goes in, which is awesome. 1,800 pounds of shear strength. And what we need to do is acknowledge that that firing pin needs to be lined up perfectly. So you've got to compress it all the way. So we're going to compress it all the way and then get it through the middle. Now initially we don't have to worry about that. We just want to get the pin started. So the little slot facing the 12 o'clock there, the top of the slide. So get it centered up good. All right. Give it a few taps, get it started. Now that firing pin may try to wiggle its way out. You just push it back in. We are going to need to hold it all the way flush and captured here in a second, but it is nice to be able to get it started without having to hold it. So you can hold it in place here now. We're going to drive it the rest of the way home. I'm just compressing it with my finger all the way in. Just like that. You can also use a punch and place it on top. And then use that to compress with. That also helps. Makes it kind of handy. And now we just need to drive that pin all the way home. So we got all the clearance we need. So it's nice to have a decent sized hammer to help you drive that pin through. Make sure that firing pin's fully compressed just like that. And you can kind of take a quick look through in the center there, make sure there's no impact. All right, good, I can see the whole pin. I'm not hitting the firing pin, so that's a good check. Now we don't have to worry about holding it because it's captured and engaged. I'm getting close to the slide now, so I'm going to take my 1/8 inch punch and use that the rest of the way. Now I'm going to drop down to my 3/32 inch punch. All right, we're starting to get it all the way through there. Still a lot of room left on this side, so I'm going to keep going. All right, it's pretty well even now. All right, we're good to go. So the slide is back together for what we needed to do there. So now all we need to do is drop our barrel in. Now we'll insert our recoil spring and guide rod. You'll notice the guide rod on this end is smaller than this end. So this is the end we're going to push into the end of the slide there. We're going to compress this wider end right here on that lug on the barrel. Press it right in, get it lock and locate. All right, we're good to go. So we can set the slide to the side for now. Now we're going to focus on disassembling the frame, replacing the springs, and doing necessary polishing where we need to. All right, so here's the inside of the frame here. So you can see you've got your trigger return spring up front here, your trigger bar spring down here. You can see this is your ejector, which your ejector we're going to use as a release. That's just going to allow us to remove the safety lever, decocker lever. And then you can see this is your sear, your hammer here. This has got a really rough surface here on the hammer, so we're going to really clean that up and make this trigger pull nice and smooth. And one thing I want to point out is when you're pulling on that trigger, you can see that sear and that hammer surface right there. There's a lot of that grittiness in that trigger pull from those two surfaces engaging one another right there. So you can see that sear and that hammer, how they're interacting with one another right there, just rubbing all day long. And then that trigger bar too is engaging a lot of surface area. So this is where the firing pin block stop engages the trigger bar right here. So we're going to smooth up that portion. We're going to do most of the trigger bar anyway, the sear and then the hammer. It's going to really smooth it up a lot. And you can see this other portion of the trigger bar on this end engaging the rest of the internal components here, especially that trigger bar disconnector right there. So you'll see, if you look real close, this is the trigger bar disconnector. It looks like a bearing almost. And that's where the trigger bar is rubbing underneath. All right, so a lot of good surface area to clean up and really smooth out that trigger pull, man. It's going to make it so much nicer. So that just gives you a good view right there of how it's all moving together and those surfaces, metal on metal grinding. If it's not smooth, it's going to feel gritty. It's going to feel bad. So we're going to take our 3/32 inch punch. We're going to tap out this trigger hinge pin here. And we'll take a look as we're going through it. You can see there's the trigger return spring right there in the center. And you can see this is our hinge pin right here. You can see there's our trigger hinge pin right here. It's got that little notch cut out for the trigger return spring right there in the center. So we'll set this aside for now. We'll go ahead and Put your finger over top of that trigger return spring because it will try to fly away on you. There's the trigger return spring there. We're going to be replacing that. I'm going to go ahead and put that factory spring into the bag. It's our trigger right here. So that little short leg on the trigger return spring locates inside the trigger here. That long leg locates inside the frame, that little channel right there. So what we're going to do now is take our little micro tip flathead, push down on that trigger bar spring to relieve tension on that trigger bar. All right, so now we need to remove the safety lever or the hammer decocking lever, whichever option you've got. In this case, this is a hammer decocking lever, but it could be a safety lever. It just depends which type you have. You'll notice this coiled spring here sits on that lever. All right, safety lever, hammer decocking lever, whichever option you have. And you'll notice that spring is captured on the lever there. That little short leg is captured right on that little face right there. You'll see it better when we get it out. And that weird little squiggly leg locates inside of a roll pin in the frame. Just like to point it out ahead of time because it might surprise you when you get it out. It looks kind of weird. It's definitely not a spring we're replacing. So that is a hammer decocking lever spring there that rides on the lever for your safety lever or your hammer decocking lever, which other option you have. So what we'll do to get that lever out is to push down on the ejector here. It is kind of weird because most of the time the ejector is fixed in most firearms, but this one is also used as a lever for disassembly. All right, so take your micro tip. We're going to make a little space here on the lever. Make sure your hammer is locked back. Make a little space here on the lever, prying it out. All right, push down on that ejector. It works as a release, a lever. And now we're going to be able to remove the decocking lever, safety lever. All right, and that little spring just popped. So the other half of the lever's right there. All right, you see how it's got that little square feature to go in that square peg right there on the decocking lever. And then what I'll do is I'll continue to slide it out. You'll see there's that spring there and how it locates down inside that little roll pin in the frame. See that little short leg there that's exposed? That little short leg is what locates on that little tab right there on the pin. All right, so we'll go ahead and remove this lever, just kind of wiggle it out. And when we reinstall it, we're going to install it this exact same way. So you got this weird little feature right here that captures a hammer decocking lever spring. It's going to go in just like this. Because you're going to fight it, you know, if you don't remember it, just remember that. It makes life a lot easier. And then we're going to remove that spring right there. So this is what the hammer decocking lever spring looks like. We're not replacing this. We're just going to set it aside. You can see it just goes right down that roll pin right there. So we'll set it aside with the lever. So here's the three pieces we just removed. So here's the hammer decocking lever spring right here. And that little leg, that short leg, is what locates right here on that little feature on the hammer decocking lever. All right, so that's good to know. You see how this square peg on the end right here will locate into this little square channel right there. Pretty straightforward. All right, so we'll set these items aside and we'll get back to the disassembly. All right, so now we need to remove this sear pin. You'll see on the opposite side there's a smaller hole, so we'll push it from this side here. But to get out the ejector, which is locking and locating the sear pin in place, you'll see there's a little notch once we get it out. That's where the ejector hinges and locates in place. To get the ejector out, we'll have to compress that spring, pull it down, and then up and out. So we'll push it down, compressing the spring, pull it down or push it down, and then up and out. Pretty simple. So you can see here's the ejector here. That's where it locates in the back of this notch here in the pin. So that's why we had to push down, down, up and out. All right, so that's the ejector there. We'll set it aside. Now we can get access to pushing out the sear pin from this side here. So our sear is right here. Remove the firing pin block lever and the trigger bar disconnector back here. So those three items will come out. So we'll start on this side, the small hole end, take our little 3/32 inch punch, and should be able to just push it right out. All right, so our firing pin block lever and trigger bar disconnector are free. You can see there, they are there. So these two items are compressed into one another. That little bushing looking thing is a trigger bar disconnector compressed right into the firing pin block lever. So we can set this item aside. When it goes back in, it's going to go in this orientation here. We'll set it aside for now. Keep them together. I like to keep separate little piles aside there. So now we're going to push down the sear so that we can continue pulling out the sear pin. All right, I'm just kind of spinning it out just like that. All right, there it goes. There goes the hammer. And the sear is right here. And notice this is how the sear will locate when it goes back in. See this little corner right here? fits like a puzzle piece. It's very important to pay attention to. Handy information for when it goes back in. So there's our sear right there. And this is the engagement side right here. It's going to be a little rough. We're going to polish it up. That's what engages with the top of that hammer there. So we'll set our sear down. We'll set our sear pin down. You can see this little notch right here on the sear pin. That's where the ejector locates, where we had to push down and kind of pull it down and up. That's where it locates right there in that cutout, and that's what locks it all in place. So we'll set the sear pin down. So now we've got good exposure to the inside of the frame, the remaining components at least. You can see here is our sear spring right here. So we'll go ahead and we'll pop this out. So here's our sear spring here. We're going to be replacing this with the lighter sear spring. So I'm going to put this with the factory springs. Don't need that. Now this is our extractor spring right here. I'm just going to leave it inside. No need to remove it. And there's that little roll pin where that hammer decocking lever spring locates. And this is our disconnector right here. So remember earlier how I was talking about how you can't remove the trigger bar yet because that disconnector, which is connected to the hammer, it drops right over top of that trigger bar, and that's how it all locates together. So it's locking the trigger bar in place. So now pull up on that disconnector. So we got the disconnector back, and that trigger bar is free along with the trigger now. You see it's still trying to grab it. All right, so there's the trigger bar right there, and the trigger locates right in that hole. So we can pull the trigger off, set it aside. So we'll take a close look at this trigger bar. This is where the trigger locates here. This is on the inside of the frame. This is the side that locates right up against the polymer frame. Now this side's already been polished a little bit. One of our guys did a little pre-polishing just because it was so bad. So we're gonna polish the entire thing, so don't worry about it. It's gonna really make a huge difference. If all you've got is that 1000 grit sandpaper, you're not gonna be able to do a whole lot, so just do the outside here with the 1000 grit. That'll be enough to get you by. You know, put some grease on it to lube it up, should be fine. But if you've got a polishing kit, and we're gonna polish this thing up, it's gonna look chrome by the time we're done with it, which is gonna look really cool. Love those instant results. All right, and really that's it. So now we're gonna pull the hammer out because we wanna do a little polishing work back here anyway. You can see the hammer springs right down in there. So we're gonna need to access that hammer spring first, relieve the tension. All right, so now what we need to do to get the hammer spring out, you can see it right down in there. We need to release this main spring plug here, or hammer spring plug. We need to release this pin as well. So what we need to do is relieve tension on that plug. So I find that just using your pliers, using the handles there, you just press down on that handle. Because it's at an angle, you can't really press down on the table. It's hard to access that. So we just need to relieve some of that tension on the pin. So we're pressing down on the plug, using our 3/32 inch punch, and pushing out that pin simultaneously. All right, so once you catch that plug in the right spot, on the handle of the pliers or anything really, you can lay a punch down, do the same thing. Now we're going to be able to remove our punch. Keep your finger over top of that plug. It's going to be under a good amount of tension. Don't want it going flying everywhere. All right, so there's the plug and the hammer spring right there. And there's a hammer strut right inside. So it'll be a quick, easy swap. Pull out the factory hammer spring, put it aside with the other components. Grab our lighter MCARBO hammer spring, and we're ready to go. Now I'm going to set this down for a second. What I want to do is pull out this hammer so we can get access to it, and we can do some of the polishing there on that really gritty surface. You can see those machine marks right there. See those 3 little lines? We need to clean that up. That's adding to a lot of that grittiness in the trigger pull. All right, so now we want to get the hammer out. The only pin remaining is that hammer hinge pin there. Now this hammer hinge pin, it's got a notch off to one side, and that notch is what locates into the disconnector right here. So as you've noticed so far, a lot of these pins have notches in them to keep them from just wiggling out, and they have a lot of these other components interact with them to make sure they don't just wiggle out under vibration. So when you push that disconnector all the way back to the hammer just like this, now that pin can just fall right out. So when we got our disconnector pushed all the way back to the hammer like this, now our pin will fall right out. You just push right in on it, and out it goes, simple as that. Which is really cool, kind of unique how they did a lot of this. You know, they made all these little tiny secondary effects that went into keeping it all together, which is pretty cool how it all locates into one piece. So you'll notice that it's off to one side here. So when we put it back in, we just need to make sure that little notch is on the side where the disconnector is, right there. And that disconnector locates right on that hammer, and you'll see it here in a second. So when we pull up and out, here is the hammer strut, and the disconnector. The disconnector just sits right there on that little pin on the hammer. And you'll notice that disconnector is interfering with that hole, which is the through hole for that hammer hinge pin. When that disconnector is all the way up, now it's not interfering with it. It's kind of unique how they've got these little nuances with the whole CZ P07 there, and a lot of the other firearms too that CZ makes. So it's pretty cool, well engineered, well designed. All right, so we're going to set the disconnector down. You can see the surface here on top of the hammer. This is where the sear engages with the hammer. And look at those machining lines. And you can run your fingernail across it. You can just feel them grabbing. There's a lot of rough burrs there, a lot of machining marks and lines. And those machining marks and lines definitely don't contribute to a smooth, clean trigger pull. It's going to feel gritty. It's going to feel nasty. You can almost hear it. I can definitely hear it. I can definitely feel it. So run your fingernail across yours and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So this whole surface is just really burred up, machine mark city. So we can clean that up. And we'll do that now with polishing kit and the 1000 grit sandpaper. All right, so these are all the components that we just removed from the frame. Let's go over them real quick. Here's your trigger return spring, your trigger bar, your trigger hinge pin, your hammer decocking lever spring, your hammer decocking lever or your safety lever, your ejector, your sear spring, your sear, your firing pin block lever, and then your trigger bar disconnector down here. And this is your sear pin right here. The ejector hinge is right there on that sear pin. Then you've got your disconnector up here, which locates on the hammer, your hammer strut, and your hammer hinge pin right here, hammer spring, your main spring plug or your hammer spring plug, and your main spring plug pin. So from here, we're only going to use a few items to clean up, do some polishing on. So we'll take the trigger off of the trigger bar. We're going to use the trigger bar, so we'll set that in a little pile right here. And then we're going to take our firing pin block lever and trigger bar disconnector, that little bushing right there. That's especially what we want to polish. We'll polish the whole thing though. Then we'll take our sear, put that in that polishing pile, and then we'll take our hammer. And we'll go ahead and leave the hammer strut connected to it. Not a big deal, but we mainly want to polish that hammer face there. And that's it. The rest of these items we'll just set aside for a minute. All right, so these are the 4 components we're going to polish here. So we've got our firing pin blocking lever and our trigger bar disconnector. They're compressed together as one part for now. You can take them apart, but no need. Our sear, our trigger bar, and our hammer. Hammer strut's still attached, but it's fine. 1000 grit piece of sandpaper that came with the kit. Some kind of grease. Synthetic grease of PTFE works great. So we'll go ahead and we'll start with the hammer first. So get some grease on top of that sandpaper there. You know, it's wet sand. We're not trying to really remove any material. We're just trying to make sure we smooth out those rough edges right there. So just lightly with your hand. You don't even want to press it on the table. We're just running this little piece of paper lightly over the material. So you really can't put a whole lot of pressure on there to remove any material. All we're doing is getting some of those burrs smoothed out. Those machining lines erased more or less. So real light. We're just trying to almost do what would happen naturally over time. You know, if you shot it enough, it would naturally wear down and it would smooth out. So you can already see it starting to, oh man, that's way better already. So you can't really feel any of those rough edges, those little fingers grabbing your fingernail. You can't really feel that, so that's good. So we'll keep sanding a little bit. You know, very, very light pressure here. All right, that's it. That's enough to get it started, get any of that major grittiness off. Perfect. So we'll set the hammer down. That's good. Now we're going to take our firing pin block lever and the trigger bar disconnector. Most importantly, that trigger bar disconnector. So if you feel any grittiness on it, on that disconnector there, you can do something with it, but I don't. So I'm going to go ahead and bypass that. So now we're going to take the trigger bar, and this is the last item we're going to hit with any sort of sanding. You know, this is 1000 grit. We're barely doing anything. This is just real fine finishing work. So putting some more grease on this 1000 grit sandpaper. On the outside of this trigger bar here tends to be some grittiness. And the trigger bar is fine. It's not as sensitive as that sear and hammer engagement surface. Don't mess with the sear and hammer engagement surface. Leave it alone. We just did that one little surface because it had a ton of machine marks on it and it was a real obvious choice, but don't mess with any of the angles of the geometry. It's just not worth it. So if there's any, ooh, yeah, right here on these top edges along the trigger bar, go ahead and just hit those. Anything that's super sharp on the trigger bar, go ahead and hit it. And this is where that trigger bar spring engages. So you can imagine there's definitely some burrs on there. There's some wear.
All we're trying to do is just speed up that wear process to where it just turns buttery smooth. It would wear like that over time, but it's going to take a lot of time to do that. I'm doing a little more pressure here, not as light as I was in the hammer. All right, these little features, don't really hit them that hard. It's fine how it is. Now this little dimple right here, we're gonna go ahead and go over that. That's what engages with the firing pin block stop. We're just kind of getting the side edges and everything else so there's no sharp burrs so it doesn't hang up on anything. Metal on metal grinding is of no benefit. Just makes for a really gritty, terrible trigger pull. All right, that's it. I mean, we pretty much knocked off all the sharp areas. All right, so there's a little more sharpness right here. Gonna hit that. You know, this is definitely not something we go overboard on. We're just mainly knocking off a lot of the hard edges, and that's it, man. All right, we're good. So now we'll just go ahead and polish it all up. All right, we're done with the sandpaper and synthetic grease. You can go ahead and put them away. This is a polishing kit here. You can pick one up from us. Microfiber towel, nitrile gloves, 6mm, Flitz polish, half-ounce can. More than enough to do a few polishing jobs on other different firearms. And then your bullet-shaped felt bits. These are great for getting in all those little tight crevices. Really amazing on the rotary tool. So these are going to help a lot. This is great. If you don't have a rotary tool, you get one Harbor Freight, $8. If you don't want to do that, use your microfiber towel on the polish and that'll work just fine. All right, so we'll get set up here and then we'll start the polishing. All right, so I got everything set up here. Got my little bullet-shaped felt bits up here, even rocking the gloves. Gloves really help give you some grippiness. And you're holding these tiny parts. It's gonna get messy, yeah, but we wanna make sure we can hold on that part and we can hit the right angles. This is not anything that you do casually. You wanna make sure you're very precise and you get everything polished the way you wanna polish it. So Flitz polish, industry standard. Love this stuff. Get a whole half-ounce can of it. Plenty to do a few different polishing jobs. And then I've got a Dremel here. I'm gonna drop in one of the felt bits. All right, I'm gonna hit the little lock and tighten it right up. All right, we're good to go there. Now with this polish, you're gonna coat it on the bit first. Don't put a whole lot on there because you start spinning, it's gonna go everywhere. And make sure you've got your workstation clear. If you're on the kitchen table, whew, it's gonna go everywhere. So might be worth at least moving all of your components aside. You don't want to have your pistol frame and everything else aside. You're gonna have to clean it really good when you're done. So we want to make sure it's at least out of throwing distance of the Flitz polish. You should be wearing the eye pro already, but if you aren't, highly recommend it. You don't want to get Flitz in the eye. Not a good day. So we'll start off the trigger bar. We're gonna polish this entire thing. Real easy. Just go ahead and fire it up and we'll polish away. Throw some Flitz on it first, get it ready. Basically just coat it in Flitz. And then we're gonna just polish, man. You're gonna see this thing really look completely different. Can't wait to show you. Be careful on those sharp edges, it'll chew up that bit. You can still hit them, but just be a little more deliberate with it. And use the point. Part will definitely start to heat up on you, so the gloves help create a little barrier there. Hit this feature really good. All right, that's good there. We'll go ahead and wipe it off, take a look at our results. You can do as much or as little polishing as you like. It's entirely up to you. You can already see it starting to bling right there. I mean, this thing will really shine up. You can get it polished, chrome looking. That's pretty dang good. Definitely for what I'm trying to demonstrate here. So I'm gonna run with it. Most important feature I hit really nicely right here, and it's buttery smooth. So that's what we want. Make sure this little dimple right here gets nicely polished in the outside of the trigger bar, and that'll be good. So we can clean it up again at the end, but I also want to get this hammer really good. So I'm going to focus right here on this engagement feature area. You're not going to change into the geometry polishing, so you can really get away with going a little more excessive with it. Now with the sanding, we don't want to do that. Even though it's 1000 grit, it would take a long time, and that's why you get a tiny little piece of it. It would take a long time to change the geometry on it. You'd probably wear out the paper, and you wouldn't even really do anything detrimental, so it'd be fine. So with the polishing though, not as bad. You know, you don't have to worry about changing geometry, so we can really polish quite a bit. So we're going to do that right here, and we're going to see a lot of benefit out of this. I can't wait for this part. Go ahead and clean up your bit. If you chewed it up real bad, you got replacements, but you know, you just try not to hit those sharp edges too hard, or at least hit them a little bit more strategically. This is gonna feel awesome when we are done. Look at that, just blinging. And that is worth it right there. That is, oh man, that is buttery smooth. That is awesome. You're gonna love that, trust me. It's worth it right there, only if you do that. I mean, that is spot on, phenomenal. Look at that. You can just tell how smooth that is. And that's the thing, man. I mean, they shouldn't be so sharp and gritty that you could potentially cut something with it. It needs to be smooth. We don't want metal on metal grinding and dragging and ripping on each other. It's gotta be smooth operation, man. I'm excited about that. All right, and these next two items, we're not gonna, go too crazy on the polishing. Just need to hit them real good and call it a day on the polishing. I just love polishing, man. I could sit here forever. Just something about it's kind of therapeutic for me. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because it's the noise and I just zone out and kind of relax. It's cool. I think you're gonna like it. If you've never done any polishing, you definitely gotta put it on the bucket list, man. Give it a shot. You may love it just as much as I do. It's kind of weird. All right, that'll do for the firing pin block lever and the trigger bar disconnector. It's fine. It's not a huge critical point. It's just gonna help smooth it out a little bit, mainly this surface right here on the trigger bar disconnector. All right, so now we're gonna focus on the sear. So this engagement corner back here is most important. We're just gonna hit that area and that'll be it. All right, so it's just that edge there. That's the edge that engages on the hammer right there. So it feels good, buttery smooth already. That's what we want. So it's that underside right there in the sear, and it mates up just like this. Oh man, these two parts feel great together already. Just rub them together and see how they feel. If they feel nice and buttery smooth, you're in business, and this is perfect. So we're good, man. We can put it all back together now. All right, so I just used some CLP to clean them up. You can use some standard gun oil. It's good to go. Just want to get all that polish off of there. You can see how shiny and smooth this surface is. It's going to feel great. So here's the sear right here. There's that engagement surface that we did, and it just mates up right there. Oh man, that's so much better than what we had before. Feels awesome. So we did those. Then we did the trigger bar. It's really shiny. You can get this thing polished chrome looking if you spend a little more time polishing it, but it's good enough for what we're going to be doing. Got these sharp edges up here. Most important was this feature that engaged with the firing pin block stop. So we're good to go here. Then obviously the trigger bar disconnector, this portion was most crucial, but we also did the firing pin block lever while we were at it, since they're together at this point. So we can put all these components back in the firearm. Just want to give you that quick update on the polishing. All right, so the first part of the reassembly of the frame, these are the items going back in. So the hammer and the hammer strut, the disconnector, the hammer hinge pin, the lighter hammer spring, the hammer spring plug or mainspring plug, and the pin that locates in the plug. So what we'll do is we'll grab the hammer first, and this little pin right here is where the disconnector is going to locate. And remember, that little disconnector has got to face forward. That hook is almost going to drop down and capture that trigger bar. So it's going to sit and orient just like this. Should look just like that. And there's this little feature on the outside of the disconnector that sits facing out. So that's good. So it moves freely. Remember, it's got to be vertical right up there with the hammer. So we'll drop in that hammer strut first, feed it right in. Keep those two items together, the disconnector and the hammer. All right, so we're good. Now this pin is going to go inside, and the hammer and the disconnector have to be vertical so that this pin can slide through easily. This little notch right here off to the side, that needs to locate right under that disconnector. So I'm going to line everything up just like that. The hole's clear. And I've got that little notch ready for the disconnector, and push the pin right through. And then when you drop that disconnector down, it locks into that pin, and we're good to go. Everything's going to stay intact. It's not going to fall out. So that's cool. That's easy. Really like the way that's designed. Now we just need to insert the lighter hammer spring and the cap and the pin into this hole right here over the hammer strut. So we'll take the lighter hammer spring, insert it over the hammer strut. All right, then we want to get the orientation correct to match the grip here, line up the holes, and drop the pin in. So you just got to compress this cap on the table, get the pin in. Now if you're having trouble, use 3/32 inch punch or your 1/16 inch punch to get it initially started. Just like that, we're going to use it kind of like a guide, and then we're going to let this pin follow that punch through the hole. So we'll slide that punch out as we push in the pin on the table here. Now, as a little secondary assist, you can take your punch and just push in on that hammer spring cap, and then while we're pushing down on the table, that pin will go right through once it's lined up. There we go. So once it's started in there, you know, it's crossed through to the other side, we're golden. We can tap it the rest of the way, but it can be a little challenging, you know, it is under quite a bit of tension. All right, so just make sure it's recessed enough on both sides. All right, we're good. So we got that first phase completed, which is awesome. Look how shiny that hammer is in there. That's going to be amazing. All right, so this phase for the reinstallation, we've got our trigger and trigger bar, the lighter trigger return spring, and the trigger hinge pin. Real simple and straightforward. We're going to start with dropping in the trigger and the trigger bar. Just make sure your trigger bar locates in that bottom hole right there inside that little pocket, just like that. So we'll drop it in just like this. Remember, that little leg of the trigger return spring is going to locate in that hole right there in the trigger. So we're going to drop our trigger right into that cutout on the frame for the trigger, keeping the trigger bar and the trigger together, and then we're going to lift up on that disconnector so we can get this portion of the trigger bar to rest underneath of it. So we fit the trigger bar down under the disconnector, and it drops right over top just like that. Now our trigger bar spring, let's pop that out of the way. We don't need it yet. It's just going to cause problems for right now. We need to get the trigger bar disconnector back in before we set the tension on that trigger bar. So everything's set in place and ready, which is awesome. This is the most crucial part, is that disconnector resting over top of the trigger bar, just like that. So if that's done, we're good there. Now we can go ahead and set the linkage up here on the trigger. So we'll position the holes on the trigger appropriately so we can see all the way through. So that we can see all the way through like that. Now while we have them lined up, let's throw our 3/32 inch punch in there just to hold the alignment for us. You can even rest it on the table just like that. It's holding everything in place, which is nice. And then we'll take our lighter trigger return spring. Nice thing about this is it'll be easy to drop in and hold in position and just throw our pin right in. The most important thing is that short little leg right there is going to rest inside the trigger. This long leg is going to rest in that notch cut out on the polymer frame. You'll see it here. Now what we're going to do, go ahead and set down your trigger return spring, grab your trigger hinge pin. It's that one with that little narrow channel in the middle, and start to push out that 3/32 inch punch. That way there we can guarantee we've got the right alignment there for the pin, and we won't be struggling with it once we're trying to hold that trigger return spring in place. So you can see I've got the pin located on that first ear right there on the trigger, which will be handy just to have it somewhat located. Now we're going to take our trigger return spring, that little short leg pointing down, long leg pointing up. Long leg is going to go in that channel right there, little short leg in that hole in the trigger. Now grab your needle nose pliers and just position it like this on those coils. It just helps as an extension there. And go ahead and set the spring down into the trigger in that channel. and we're going to push it forward. And once we've pushed it forward enough, we should be able to push that pin through no problem. You just got to keep pushing that spring forward until you're able to push that pin through the coils just like that on that trigger return spring, which it's much easier to push and manipulate than the factory spring. It's a lighter spring, so it'll just drop right into place like that. Make sure you got good, nice, consistent movement back and forth on that trigger. Trigger should reset forward. All right, so we got our pin in both sides. Then you can take your little punch and just push it a little bit if you need to make sure it's evenly recessed on both sides, which it is. We're good. So our trigger return spring's in place. Little short legs in that hole on the trigger, long leg in that channel on the polymer frame. Our trigger bar back here, it's not set under spring tension yet. We'll do that next. Most importantly, this bend on the trigger bar is captured by that disconnector. You see that little piece down there that's captured by the disconnector. That's what we want. So we're good there. This phase is complete. All right, for this next phase, we're going to install the firing pin block lever and the trigger bar disconnector. This is one piece right now. The Sear spring, lighter spring from the kit, the ejector, and the Sear pin. All right, so we'll insert the Sear pin first. It's going to be from the left side to the right side, or big hole to the little hole. So you've got the little end going in first through that big hole. All right, it goes right through. There's another hole inside here. It goes right over top of the disconnector and then go through the other hole there. But we need to get a couple other parts in place. First and foremost will be that Sear and Sear spring. So we'll drop our Sear spring, the lighter one from the kit, right into that pocket right there. You can use your punch as a guide to help you drop it right in if you like. And then take your Sear and we're going to drop it in just like this. This is the side that we polished with that edge right there. It's going to go right on, little square fitting into the other square initially. It's going to drop in just like this. And remember what we talked about, getting that little square on square alignment up here. All right, so we're going to press down on the Sear because it's under spring tension now that the Sear spring's in there. I want to straighten it up a little bit so we can get that pin all the way through and get those two corners lined up in the top left there. We're going to push that Sear pin through. All right, we got the Sear pin through. Now we can get ready to put in that firing pin block lever and trigger bar disconnector. Our firing pin block lever and trigger bar disconnector is still in one piece. It's going to drop in this orientation right here. All right, I'm just looking at it straight on so I can get it level with that Sear pin and push that pin right through once it is level, and make sure that pin goes through this little tiny hole on the right side, and there's the big hole on the left side. So we're good to go there. We just need to put in the ejector. But remember the ejector, it's going to compress the ejector spring and rock under that Sear pin. And it's going to locate in that little narrow pocket. So you should be able to see that little narrow pocket in that little channel there. So we'll set up the ejector just like this. We're going to press down on that ejector spring and we're going to push it right up. And then take one of your punches. I like the 1/16 inch punch because it's narrow enough. Push down on that ejector and push it straight back to make sure it's fully seated. Because sometimes it'll just kind of look like it's fully seated, but until you push down and really push back hard, it won't really lock into place like it should. So kind of give you that misleading illusion that it did. All right, so we're good there. This phase is complete. All right, this phase we're going to install the hammer decocking lever. It's in two pieces, and the hammer decocking lever spring is going to go in there as well. Now this hammer decocking lever spring, like we covered early on, it's going to go over the lever, and that little leg of the spring is going to rest under that tab right there. And that long crazy end is going to go down in the roll pin that's in the frame. But before we do that, let's go ahead and set the tension on that trigger bar. Just push down on that trigger bar spring, and it's going to capture under this portion of the trigger bar right here. There's a little pocket in there. Push down, snaps right up. You can just test it real quick, push up and down and make sure it springs back freely and it doesn't pop off easily. Try to flick it with your nail there. If it doesn't move, you're good. Now go ahead and grab your decocking lever or safety lever, depending on the model that you have. All right, so we're going to go ahead and insert the hammer decocking lever just like this. So the lever's pointing up, just like that, and this little feature's pointing forward. So we'll stick it in the hole, push down on the ejector. All right, we got it through. Now we need to make sure we get that spring in there. See that little roll pin down there? That's where that crazy leg is going to locate. And then the coil is going to go over the pin. The little short leg is going to locate right here. So we'll grab our hammer decocking lever spring. All right, so position the hammer decocking lever just like this on the needle nose pliers. You just got that little short leg in the pliers. That crazy leg is going to go down in that roll pin in the frame. All right, once we got it set down in the frame, we'll just take our 1/8 inch punch and just kind of drop it behind it there, hold it in place, because it'll try to shift around and spin around on you. Push down on that ejector a little bit so you get that pin through. Now that lever's hitting the trigger bar. All right, trigger bar does a nice job keeping everything in place. You know, otherwise, if you didn't have that trigger bar pressing up against that spring, the spring will be spinning around on you. So everything's in a good orientation at this point. Now it's a matter of getting the other lever in place. So we have the lever vertical, just like the other one over there. All right, they're both pointing up. Now what we want to do is push down that trigger bar and get that piece of the lever past the trigger bar so we can get that square peg of the lever into that pocket on this lever that we just put in place. Now we're still showing a little bit of gap over here, and I can see this little notch is fighting against the ejector. So push down on the ejector like that and it pops right through. See that? And now we're good. So pushing down on that ejector allowed me to push that pin all the way through. The trigger bar was down, out of the way, and it snapped right into that pocket right there, which is awesome. So that's pretty seamless. Now this is a good time, before we go any further, to set the tension on this hammer decocking lever spring. So we'll slide it over, get it in that little pocket right there. And now we'll push down on that little short leg and get it to jump under that little rest right there on the lever. Now at this point we're pretty good, but it's this little tab right here that's keeping us from fully setting the lever into this other half over here. So what we have to do is back it out just a hair as we rotate it down, because it's going to locate, this plastic tab has got to locate in this pocket down here. So the left side lever, the one that's got the pin fixed to it, it's got this little tab on it that's got to drop into that pocket. So what we'll do is we'll start to rotate everything down, and we hit that little notch right there. So we have to back it out just a hair, you know, use a micro tip, because instead of pulling on it, you can kind of gradually adjust it out. There we go, see that? Just enough to pass it. It's almost like grazing along the side corner there. And as we rotate it down, everything's following with it, and it's going to pop right into place. And now we should be able to compress it, and everything pops right into place. Just like that. Nice and seamless. It can be pretty frustrating otherwise, but that's a pretty straightforward way to go about it. Now let's check the decocking lever, make sure it works. Cock the hammer, down on the decocking lever, cock the hammer, perfect. That's awesome. So we're good to go there. And now at this point, the frame's complete. Everything's in there that needs to be in there, so we can go ahead and put the slide on. So grab your slide, line it up, push it back to the tick marks there. Take your slide stop. We're going to drop it right in, this orientation here. Make sure that hole's clear. Drop it right in. Pops into place. We're good to go. Now let's do a little function check. Hammer's back. Let's test the decocking lever. Decocking lever works. Perfect. See that trigger moving as well? Now let's go ahead and test the double action. All right, much lighter, single action. There, oh man, that single action is real nice. Everything's functioning as it should. This feels absolutely amazing. Look at that polish there on that hammer, just blinging, and it feels absolutely smooth. Oh man, that is awesome. And double action is still double action, but it feels so much cleaner now. You know, before it had that really gritty feel to it. So much nicer than what we started with. You don't really feel that dragging, that grinding like you did before. This feels smooth, clean, exactly what you would expect. And look how frictionless that is. So much more efficient. You know, round after round, pulling this trigger, it's going to be so much more accurate and better for the shooter. I mean, you're going to have much easier time manipulating that trigger, keeping round after round downrange on target. And that single action feels absolutely amazing. I love this pistol so much more now, and this is exactly what you would have expected. I mean, CZ is just phenomenal, but we could have a much better little trigger on this. I say we go for it. I mean, this is exactly, I mean, I'm excited to see what you guys think about this. All right, let's see what we got for a modified double action trigger pull. 6 pounds, 12.1 ounces. All right, let's take one more to confirm. 6 pounds, 11.6 ounces. All right, let's see what we got for a modified single action trigger pull. 2 pounds, 5.3 ounces. Let's take one more to confirm. 2 pounds, 5.1 ounces.
Well, there you have it, guys. Nearly a 50% trigger pull reduction on your CZ P07. This thing is night and day. Completely different. I love the polishing. I love a little bit of that sanding we did too to take off some of those machine marks and burrs on very particular parts of the firearm. Love this. Really feels amazing. Oh man, that double action isn't bad. I mean, it's 6 3/4, but the single action, smooth as glass. I love the single action trigger pull now. Oh man, this is exactly what you would expect your CZ to perform like. Really love this. Like I said at the beginning of the video, if this isn't something that you're really comfortable doing yourself, you can send it to us. We're a Type 7 manufacturer, so it's simple. You drop it in the mail to us, and we can mail it right back to you. No unnecessary FFL fees. Now check out our website. Custom shop services are explained on there, so you can get a good rundown of what to do, even a form there to explain how to do it. So really excited about this. I hope you guys got great results with it. Thank you, MCARBO Brotherhood, for your ideas and your support. And as always, happy shooting.